You know, usually when we talk about business strategy, there's this expectation of just constant motion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like you have to be a shark, right? You have to keep swimming, keep hustling, keep grinding, or you die.
Right. It's very loud and very performative, I mean, if you look at modern culture.
Exactly. But then you step into this world of multi-generational dynasty building, and suddenly that shark looks, well, a little bit frantic.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at a strategic landscape today that is just the absolute definition of strategic stillness.
And, that stillness is entirely by design. I mean, we've built this whole corporate culture around the idea that more is always more, right?
Mhm.
And that speed is basically the only metric that matters.
Mhm.
But enduring wealth, like real legacy wealth, it operates on an entirely different frequency.
Which is exactly why the operating system we're taking a deep dive into today is so jarring, really.
It really is.
So welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening to this, you're probably someone who just wants to cut through all the information overload out there.
Right. Looking for those actual aha moments.
Exactly. You want a fresh perspective without getting completely bogged down. And today, we're exploring a framework built by an author known as Rabbi David.
Yeah, and he's not just a religious scholar. He's an entrepreneur with a couple of decades in tech, real estate, and finance.
Right. And he's mapped out what he calls the Torah CEO Code alongside this companion framework called generational wealth, the Torah method.
Yeah, from a blog post we found dated April 28th, 2026.
And the whole premise is that he's extracted the operational psychology from these 3,000-year-old Talmudic and Kabbalistic texts.
Which is fascinating.
It is. And these are purportedly the exact highly guarded frameworks used by, these enduring billionaire families.
Rothschilds, yeah.
Exactly. But, and we have to state this right up front, we are not here to judge the religion.
No, not at all.
Or even the marketing, really. Our mission today is to just extract the raw operational psychology and these legacy-building frameworks embedded in the text.
Right, because this system explicitly rejects all that modern believe-in-yourself motivation. It relies on incredibly strict behavioral laws.
Yeah, down to literally which physical hand you are allowed to use when you pay a bill.
Which sounds crazy, but the psychology behind it is wild.
But okay, before we get to the hands, here is the contradiction that immediately made me want to argue with the source material.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Right. This deeply ancient, supposedly timeless wisdom of, strategic stillness, it's being sold right now as a $46 digital ebook.
Complete with the flashing countdown timers.
Yes. Countdown timers, buyer testimonials, special offer ends soon, urgency banners.
It is a massive friction point right out of the gate.
I mean, doesn't the medium become the message here?
Well, you have this hyper-modern, really aggressive digital sales vehicle delivering this payload of ancient, incredibly slow methodologies.
But if you are selling patience by using panic, using those exact dopamine-hacking scarcity tactics of internet marketing, aren't you filtering for the absolute wrong audience?
I see what you mean.
Like you're catching the frantic sharks, not the dynasty builders.
You'd think so, right? But perhaps you are intentionally hunting in the waters where those frantic sharks live.
Oh, because they're the ones who need it.
Because they're the ones who most desperately need the intervention, yeah. The author is bridging two entirely different realities here.
Right, because of his background.
Exactly. He's not just a scholar sitting in a study hall. He spent 20 years in modern finance and tech.
So he knows the game.
He knows it perfectly. The medium he's using targets serious CEOs, family offices, entrepreneurs, precisely where their attention currently resides.
Which is the high-speed digital economy.
Yeah. If you want to stop a speeding train, you have to get on the tracks.
Wow. Okay.
So that countdown timer, it captures the modern mind's conditioned response to urgency. But once you get past that paywall, the actual architecture of the system completely subverts the very emotion that drove the purchase.
I hear that, but it still feels kind of like a Trojan horse to me.
How so?
Well, you buy it expecting a quick hack to, 10x your revenue this quarter. And instead, the first thing it does is explicitly, almost forcefully, reject the entire premise of modern motivation.
Oh, absolutely. There is zero interest in how you feel.
Zero hype. It frames itself purely as a rigid operating system.
And we have to really unpack the psychological mechanics of why an operating system is inherently superior to motivation.
Right, especially when we're talking about a timeline of decades.
Or generations, exactly. Because think about it, motivation is fundamentally just an emotional state.
It's volatile.
Highly volatile. It's a biological fluctuation. It's subject to your cortisol levels, how well you slept.
A fight with your spouse.
Right. Or macroeconomic news. It goes up and down. But an operating system, on the other hand, is a pre-programmed set of conditional logic.
It's like upgrading your smartphone's iOS.
That's a perfect analogy.
You aren't giving the phone a pep talk to run faster, you know?
Right.
You are changing the fundamental code of how it processes data. It dictates an automatic behavioral response to a specific input, regardless of how you feel.
Precisely. If we look at how that actually plays out, it means you don't need to feel brave to hold your ground in a negotiation.
Because the code tells you to hold your ground.
Exactly. You don't need to feel inspired to structure your team correctly. You just execute the protocol.
The system treats business success not as a product of passion, but as a byproduct of strict adherence to this architecture.
Because if you rely on passion, the moment the passion fades, the business model collapses.
Which is why so many startups fail when the founder burns out.
Exactly. The founder was the engine and the fuel was adrenaline. This framework replaces that adrenaline engine with a mechanical gear system.
Okay, so let's look at how that gear system actually functions in the real world.
Let's do it.
Because a lot of high-level strategy can sound really great in theory, but then it completely falls apart at the level of daily friction.
Here.
And the framework addresses this by starting with the most literal, physical microhabit imaginable.
Law 1.
Yes, it's called the law of the sealed hand, or the right-hand rule.
It is the foundation of the physical discipline required to run the rest of the code.
And the rule is incredibly rigid. You must reserve your right hand exclusively for receiving.
So receiving money, signing a revenue contract.
Right, but you never, under any circumstances, use your right hand for outgoing payments.
Never.
You must use your left hand for all outflows. Swiping a credit card, paying a vendor, handing over a tip, it all has to be done with the left hand.
Yeah, and to understand the utility of this, we kind of have to bypass the mystical aesthetic for a second and look at the psychological architecture underneath.
Okay, unpack that for us.
So the roots of this lie in Kabbalistic concepts. The right side is associated with cheesed, which represents loving kindness, generosity, and the unrestricted inflow of abundance.
Okay.
The left side is gevura, which is the energy of judgment, restriction, discipline, boundaries.
So paying a bill is literally an act of restriction. You are reducing your resources.
Exactly. Releasing capital is an act of gevura. The argument here is that if you perform an act of restriction using the hand associated with unrestricted flow, right, you are creating a cognitive and behavioral contradiction. You are conditioning yourself to associate the release of wealth with the ease of receiving it.
It's like you're creating leaks.
Exactly. You're pushing wealth away. By forcing the use of the left hand, you are physically aligning the action of releasing funds with the mental state of disciplined, measured restriction.
It kind of reminds me of physical anchors in sports psychology.
Oh, yeah.
Like a tennis player bouncing the ball exactly 3 times before serve,
Right.
To trigger that state of focused discipline. But let's ground this in modern behavior for a second.
Sure.
Right now, the entire tech industry is built on eliminating the friction of spending.
Oh, 100%. Apple Pay, one-click Amazon purchasing.
Auto-renewing subscriptions. The goal of the modern economy is to make the outflow of your capital as seamless and unconscious as breathing.
And that seamlessness is exactly what the law of the sealed hand is designed to destroy.
So by forcing yourself to stop and switch hands before handing over a credit card, are you essentially short-circuiting that modern impulse to mindlessly spend?
Yes. Because if you are right-handed reaching for your phone to tap a reader at the coffee shop, it's a subconscious reflex.
It requires zero cognitive load.
Exactly. By installing a rule that forces you to stop, intercept your own reflex, and switch the phone to your left hand before you pay, you are forcefully injecting a moment of conscious friction into that dopamine loop of consumerism.
But I mean, is that just a placebo? Is the benefit really just the 2 seconds of delay?
Well, it's far more than a delay. It's a pattern interrupter that actually changes your baseline neurology over time.
Really?
Yeah. You are essentially training your brain to recognize that capital outflow is a serious, deliberate act that requires cognitive engagement. You stop being a passive participant in your own spending.
Wow.
And this has a really profound secondary effect on how you are perceived by others, which ties into this concept of signaling theory.
Signaling theory in what sense?
So, The framework emphasizes that broadcasting wealth makes you a target. In the natural world, prey that makes sudden, careless movements gets eaten.
Right.
In business, individuals who spend money carelessly or reflexively or flashily, they signal to the market that they are easy marks. They lack discipline.
Then they become the prey.
Exactly.
Right.
When you meticulously control the physical flow of your capital, when every transaction is a measured, slightly deliberate act, you project an aura of absolute restraint.
You don't look like an easy target.
No, you don't look like a tourist in the financial ecosystem. You look like an apex predator who is entirely in control of their resources.
Man, that shifts the dynamic entirely because you aren't just saving $3 on a latte, you are actively practicing the physical posture of power.
Exactly.
Because if you can't control which hand holds your credit card, how can you control a multi-million-dollar merger?
You can't. The micro habit scales to the macro strategy.
Okay, let's test how that scales then. Let's move from the coffee shop to the boardroom.
Good transition.
If the law of the sealed hand creates physical restraint, how does that translate into actual strategic leverage?
Right.
Because the framework has specific protocols for what it calls the art of the deal. And it focuses heavily on three things: negotiation silence, asymmetry, and hidden prices.
Let's start with negotiation silence, which is Law 3. It's particularly revealing.
Okay.
We often think of negotiation as a battle of rhetoric, right? The person with the sharpest arguments wins.
Usually, yeah.
This framework completely flips that. It treats silence as a zero-cost, high-leverage weapon.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here for a second.
Go for it.
The power of the pause is in literally every single airport bookstore negotiation guide.
True.
It's a known tactic. You make an offer, you shut up, and you wait for the other guy to crack. Is framing this as an ancient sacred law just dressing up a standard corporate trick in a nice tuxedo?
It's a very fair question, but it's a vital distinction to make here. The difference between a tactic and an operating principle is compliance under pressure.
Okay, explain that.
If silence is just a trick you read in a paperback, you deploy it when you remember, but you abandon it the second your anxiety spikes. And humans, we abhor conversational vacuum.
Oh, it's so uncomfortable.
When millions of dollars are on the line, the biological urge to fill the silence, to relieve that tension, is overwhelming. If it's just a tactic, your biology will override it.
Does it just feel awkward?
Exactly. But if silence is integrated into a rigid ethical and operational code, if it is viewed as the verbal equivalent of the sealed hand, a required restriction of your informational wealth, it ceases to be optional.
You don't break the silence because breaking it violates the architecture of your entire system.
Right. You elevate it from a situational hack to an existential requirement.
Okay, I see the mechanism there. It's about building a dam against your own anxiety.
Yes.
And when you force that silence onto the other party, they are the ones who have to deal with the pressure vacuum.
And what happens when they try to relieve that pressure?
They start talking.
They speak, they fill the gap, and in doing so, they almost invariably negotiate against themselves.
Wow.
One testimonial in the source claims this specific law saved a buyer $40,000 on a single deal. Because when the other side fills the gap, they reveal their timeline, their internal pressures or concessions they're willing to make that you hadn't even thought to ask for.
So information is wealth.
Exactly. The more you broadcast, the more vulnerable you are. Silence protects your informational capital.
And there's a recurring theme here, right? Protection. Protecting your money, protecting your words, protecting your information.
Yes.
Which leads directly into another major protocol in this section, the hidden price law.
Ah, yes.
The rule is that you must never let the other side see your true cost basis. If I manufacture a widget for $2 and sell it for $20, the buyer must never know about the $2 baseline.
Yes, and this is where we hit a fascinating philosophical tension in the system.
Right, because alongside the hidden price law, you have Law 6, honest measure and weights.
Exactly.
And this is derived from explicit, severe Torah commandments against using false scales in the marketplace. It demands absolute, uncompromising fairness and accuracy in how you deliver value.
So the obvious question is, how do those two coexist?
Yeah. If I am hiding my massive profit margin from you, how am I simultaneously practicing uncompromising honesty?
You have to separate the concept of transparency from the concept of integrity. Modern business culture often conflates the two, right? Demanding radical transparency as proof of honesty.
Like radical transparency is the ultimate virtue now.
Right. But this ancient framework completely rejects that. It argues that you do not owe the counterparty the internal mechanics of your operation.
So my costs are my business.
Your cost basis, your efficiency, the proprietary methods you use to keep your overhead low, that is your intellectual and operational property. Protecting that asymmetry is not dishonest. It is the fundamental right of the entrepreneur.
But the output, what the customer actually receives, has to be exactly as promised.
Precisely. If you promise a certain quality of steel, it must be that exact grade. If you agree to a timeline, you meet it. The value delivered must be fiercely honest.
But the margin you extract for delivering that value is your private domain.
Yes. To reveal your cost basis is to invite the buyer to commoditize your efficiency. It shifts the negotiation from the value of the outcome to the cost of the inputs.
Which is a guaranteed race to the bottom. Let's try to apply that to, say, a listener who is running a mid-sized marketing agency.
Okay, great example.
The client comes in and wants a full breakdown of the hourly rates of every junior designer to justify the monthly retainer.
Right.
The hidden price law says you refuse that request. You sell the increase in the client's sales, and you maintain total silence on how cheaply you can produce that outcome internally.
And you enforce the honest measure by ensuring the campaign actually drives the sales you promised. You protect the margin, but you deliver the result flawlessly.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So you've optimized your spending with physical friction, you've secured your informational leverage through silence, and you've protected your margins.
You're doing great.
But all of that is still just you acting as a sole operator. To build a multi-generational empire, you have to scale.
We do.
And that means incorporating time, partners, and people. So let's look at the operational framework for building the actual machine. The text brings up something called Billionaires Monday.
Law 7. The assertion here is that the structure of your Monday determines the wealth of your entire week. It demands a radical restructuring of daily routines.
Now, a lot of modern productivity gurus would say Monday is for a progressive execution.
Oh, for sure. Wake up at 4 a.m., hit the gym.
Fire off 100 emails, crush the competition before they finish their coffee. Does this system align with that kind of hyperkinetic hustle?
Not at all. If we look at the overarching philosophy of measured restraint, that kind of frantic Monday would be a violation of the system.
Really?
Yeah. Systems that endure for centuries are not built on reactive adrenaline. They are built on proactive architecture. It is far more likely that Billionaires Monday dictates a period of intense, protected isolation.
Strategic isolation.
Yes. The human brain cannot simultaneously operate in the trenches of execution and the balcony of strategy.
Oh, that's good.
Right. If you open your inbox at 8 a.m. on Monday, your week is no longer yours. You are immediately reacting to the priorities, the emergencies, and the demands of other people.
Your operating system just got hijacked by external inputs.
Exactly. Billionaires Monday is likely a protocol that walls off the beginning of the week strictly for calibration. You review the systems.
Yeah.
You assess the macro landscape.
You decide the parameters of the week before you allow a single external demand to enter your cognitive space.
It's the difference between steering the ship and furiously bailing water in the engine room. You have to lock yourself in the wheelhouse first.
I love that. But eventually, you do have to interact with others to scale.
You do.
And here is where the framework makes a very aggressive claim about partnerships.
The covenant of the right partner.
Yeah. Law 4, partnership ethics. It explicitly warns against rigid 50-50 equity splits, calling them a disastrous trap.
It advocates for proportional risk and role clarity instead.
Why is 50-50 viewed so toxically?
Because 50-50 is rarely about actual equality of contribution. It is almost always about the fear of confrontation.
Oh, wow. That's incredibly sharp. Unpack that for us.
Well, when two founders sit down to start a company, the conversation about who is bringing more value, who is taking more risk, who has the harder skill set, that conversation is deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, it requires intense vulnerability.
And potential conflict. So to avoid that conflict, they just default to 50-50.
It feels fair.
It feels egalitarian, it feels friendly, but it is a structural cowardice that bakes a fatal flaw into the very foundation of the business.
It makes me think of building a race car with 2 steering wheels.
Exactly.
It seems completely fair to both drivers on the straightaway, but the moment you hit a patch of ice and need to swerve, if both drivers pull in opposite directions, the car tears itself apart.
It's a catastrophic.
You absolutely have to have a tiebreaker.
And a 50-50 split guarantees a deadlock precisely when the stakes are highest and the timeline is shortest.
Right.
The framework demands that founders endure the friction of an unequal split before the covenant is signed. Who has the final say on product? Who has the final say on capital allocation?
By establishing a clear hierarchy based on proportional risk, you eliminate that ego-driven paralysis.
The same paralysis that destroys most partnerships in year 3.
Right. Okay, so what happens when those partners start hiring?
That brings us to Law 5, the hiring code.
And it claims this is a Talmudic approach to evaluating talent. The rule is simple. Evaluate character first, skills second.
Right.
Now, Rabbi David comes from tech and finance.
Yes, he does.
And in those worlds, if you have a developer who writes code 10 times faster than anyone else, or a quantitative trader whose algorithm just prints money, the company will tolerate almost anything.
Oh, anything.
They will tolerate massive arrogance, toxic behavior, a complete lack of interpersonal ethics. The skill is literally the only metric.
Which is exactly why the average lifespan of a modern corporation is shrinking so drastically.
You think that's why?
I do. And this 3,000-year-old system entirely rejects the supremacy of skill.
But if you are building an operating system, why wouldn't you just want the fastest processor, regardless of its character?
Because in this architecture, character is not some soft, HR-driven culture fit. Character is a hard security protocol.
A security protocol.
Think about it mechanically. Skills can be taught, they can be updated, they can be outsourced, but a flaw in character is a virus in the system.
Ah, I see.
If your entire business model relies on the hidden price law and honest measure, on protecting margins while delivering rigorous value, a highly skilled employee who lacks integrity is a catastrophic risk.
Because they will cut a corner to hit a quarterly bonus?
Yes. They will falsify a metric, or they'll leak proprietary information to leverage a better position for themselves, or they will put a false weight on the scale to close a deal.
They violate the architecture for short-term gain.
Exactly, which introduces rot into the foundation of the long-term enterprise. A low-skill employee with high character, well, they just slow you down. A high-skill employee with low character can bring down a 100-year dynasty in a weekend.
Character as a security protocol, that completely reframes the interview process.
It really does.
You aren't looking for the smartest person in the room. You are looking for the most structurally sound person in the room.
Bingo.
So let's assume you've done this perfectly. You have the discipline of the sealed hand. You negotiate with silence. You own 60% of the company, avoiding that 50-50 trap. You hire only high-character people.
You're doing everything right.
And you generate massive wealth. But statistics show that the vast majority of family wealth evaporates by the third generation.
It's a known phenomenon.
Right. The grandchildren sell the company, they buy yachts, and they go broke. How does the system prevent the inevitable decay of success?
This is where we cross the horizon from standard business strategy into dynasty architecture.
Which is the focus of the companion volume, Generational Wealth?
Yes.
Dynasty architecture. It's a heavy phrase. The core thesis here is the 100-generation rule.
And to grasp the gravity of the 100-generation rule, we have to contrast it with the Western business canon.
Okay, how so?
In the modern corporate world, the time horizon is microscopic. A CEO is optimizing for a quarterly earnings call. A venture capitalist is optimizing for a 5 to 7 year liquidity event. Even a prudent family is generally only optimizing for a comfortable retirement and maybe paying for their kids' college.
We are conditioned to think in increments of our own biological lifespan.
Exactly. Dynasty architecture demands that you treat the family unit not as a biological inevitability, but as an immortal corporation.
Wow.
And a corporation requires governance. It requires a constitution.
So you're transmitting knowledge to survive way beyond your lifetime.
The 100-generation rule completely reorients your definition of return on investment. You are no longer optimizing for your own consumption. You are structuring the transmission of capital and, more importantly, the transmission of the operating system itself.
So that an entity survives 300 years after you are gone.
Exactly.
But if I am a listener running like a local logistics company, how does thinking about my great-great-grandchildren change what I do on a Tuesday?
It changes your relationship with risk and leverage entirely, which the framework addresses through the Rothschild principle.
Right. The rule is, be the lender, never the borrower, across generations.
Yes.
But I want to push back on this because in a modern, hyper-competitive economy, leverage is kind of the only way to scale fast enough to survive.
It is.
If you are a startup and you refuse to take venture capital or bank loans, your competitor who does take the debt will just outspend you on marketing and crush you in 18 months.
That's a very real scenario.
Is this ancient rule just dangerously obsolete in a fast-paced VC world?
It's a vital critique, And if the rule were as simplistic, never borrow money ever, you would be right. But the framework provides a crucial mechanism to manage this reality: the debt doctrine.
The debt doctrine.
Yeah. The architecture does not forbid the use of external capital during the rapid growth phase of the first generation. What it demands is a ruthless, unsentimental categorization of the debt.
Separating wealth-building debt from wealth-destroying debt.
Exactly.
Walk me through the mechanics of that separation.
So wealth-destroying debt is consumption. It is borrowing money to buy a depreciating asset.
Like a luxury car.
Or a larger house just to signal status. Or an extravagant vacation. In the language of the system, this is an uncontrollable leak of javura.
Restriction without yield.
Exactly. It is fatal to the dynasty. Wealth-building debt, however, is mathematical leverage. It is borrowing at 5% to acquire a cash-flowing asset that yields 12%.
So the debt is collateralized by an appreciating asset that services its own liability.
Precisely. But even then, the Rothschild principle says that being the borrower is not the final state.
Right, because you want to eventually become the lender.
Yes. Leverage is a tool used by the founder to accelerate the initial accumulation of mass. But the strategic objective, the mandate for the second and third generations, is to transition out of the borrower position entirely.
Why is that transition so critical?
Because when you are the borrower, you are subject to the timeline, the risk parameters, and the mood of an external entity. You are paying rent on your own survival.
That makes sense.
When you become the lender, you control the flow of the lifeblood of the economy. You establish an intergenerational power dynamic where your family acts as the central bank of its own destiny and eventually the central bank for others.
And if you fail to manage that transition, or if you misallocate that capital, you hit what the framework calls the 5 dead investments.
Yes.
The text notes that there are specific categories of investments that reliably destroy capital across generations. Now, it doesn't list all 5 in our sources, but based on the mechanics we've discussed, we can kind of reverse engineer what they likely are.
Yeah, it is highly probable they involve uncollateralized speculation, investments heavily reliant on public trends or shifting cultural tastes.
Or ventures managed by operators who fail the character test of the Highland Code.
Exactly. The architecture of a dynasty is heavily weighted toward extreme risk mitigation and capital preservation. The goal of the first generation is to make the money. The goal of the next 99 generations is to construct a fortress around it.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room. Let's look at the composite picture we've painted so far.
Okay.
We have an operator who hoards informational leverage through silence. They maintain absolute opacity regarding their costs. They refuse equal partnerships to maintain control. They aggressively transition into the position of the lender to hold power over others.
And they view their family as an immortal corporate entity.
Right. Now, to a modern ear, this doesn't just sound capitalistic. It sounds like the blueprint for a Machiavellian nightmare.
It really does.
It sounds like the origin story of a villainous conglomerate.
Yeah.
What prevents this operating system from becoming fundamentally predatory?
Well, if the system stopped there, it would absolutely become predatory. And predatory systems historically do not last 100 generations.
Right, they get dismantled.
They are eventually dismantled by revolution, regulation, or their own internal rot. This is why the final section of the architecture, the ethical guardrails, is not merely a moral suggestion.
It's structural.
It is the structural containment field that prevents the machine from destroying itself.
Let's break down the mechanics of those guardrails. The framework introduces Law 9, ethical profit.
Yes.
And it brings in very specific Talmudic concepts here. The first is a strict prohibition against ona amamon, which translates to deception in financial matters or price fraud.
Okay.
The second is genavat dat, which is a fascinating phrase. It literally translates to stealing a person's mind, but it refers to creating a false impression or making misleading claims.
And we have to view these not as religious piety, but as pragmatic survival mechanics for the long term.
The text uses a very evocative metaphor here to explain this.
Yeah.
You are forbidden to place a stumbling block before the blind.
The powerful image.
In a modern business context, what is the stumbling block?
The stumbling block is the weaponization of information asymmetry. Let's say you are a financial advisor selling a highly complex, opaque derivative product to a retail investor who clearly does not understand the risk profile.
The investor is blind to the mechanics of the trade.
Exactly. If you sell it to them anyway because your commission is high, you have placed a stumbling block before them.
You've exploited their lack of vision.
Exactly. Or consider genavat dat, creating a false impression. Let's say you are selling a software platform. You know it takes 6 months to integrate, but you let the client believe it can be done in 4 weeks just to get the signature on the contract.
Ah, I see.
You haven't outright lied about the price, but you have stolen their mind. You have manipulated their perception of reality to extract capital.
But here is the brutal truth of the modern market. People do that every single day.
All the time.
And they get rich doing it. So why does this framework strictly forbid it?
Because people get rich doing it for 1 generation. Maybe 2, if they are incredibly lucky. But when you are optimizing for 100 generations, the mathematics of deception break down.
Because it's not sustainable.
If you build a fortune on misleading claims and exploited asymmetry, you destroy the one asset that cannot be acquired with leverage: market trust.
The trust of the ecosystem.
Yes. Deception creates enemies. It invites retaliation, endless litigation, regulatory scrutiny. It ensures that no one will ever do a second deal with you.
In the short term, stealing a person's mind might look like a clever hack to boost quarterly revenue.
But in the timeline of a dynasty, it is a structural flaw that guarantees collapse. This connects directly to Law 10, integrity as brand.
Which is tied to the concept of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name through ethical action. Essentially, the idea that every business transaction you make is a public representation of your deepest values.
And in the religious context, a representation of your faith.
Right. But even stripping the theology away, the business application is that your reputation is the ultimate moat.
And that reputation extends to your interaction with the state, which is addressed in Law 11, legal compliance.
The principle here is Dina de Malkuta Dina, which translates to the law of the land is the law.
This is a crucial point. It means the framework mandates that you honor secular law.
So you pay your secular taxes, you honor standard civic contracts.
You obey the regulations of the country you operate in. It proves that this operating system is not designed to create an isolated, rebel state that is constantly at war with its host environment.
It's designed for integration.
Seamless, high-integrity integration. You cannot build an enduring fortress if you're perpetually trying to outsmart or evade the local authorities.
Because tax evasion or contract fraud might save you 20% today, but it risks the confiscation of 100% tomorrow.
Exactly. It is terrible risk management. The ethical laws are the immune system of the dynasty. They protect the entrepreneur from the fatal consequences of their own short-term greed.
Which leads perfectly to the absolute ultimate vulnerability of any successful founder.
Yes.
If you master the sealed hand, if you dominate the negotiation with silence, if you build the unshakable ethical moat, what eventually kills you?
It's a great question.
The framework identifies this in what it calls the final law, Law 12. It describes it as the line between growth and self-destruction.
And the antidote it prescribes is continual study.
Because the ultimate wealth destroyer is not a competitor, and it is not a market crash.
No, it is hubris.
The arrogance of success.
Yes. When a founder or a CEO achieves massive success using a system, there is a profound psychological danger that they begin to believe they are the system.
Oh, wow.
They believe they have mastered the game, that the rules no longer apply to them, that they no longer need to learn. That is the exact moment they cross the line into self-destruction.
They stop running the code because they think they wrote the universe.
Exactly. The Talmudic tradition places an immense, non-negotiable premium on the rigorous daily study of texts, ethics, and law.
By mandating regular protected time aside to learn to wrestle with complex ideas, to realize how much you do not know, the operating system forces an artificial humility onto the founder.
It acts as an ego dampener. It reminds the CEO that they are merely a temporary steward of the architecture, not the architect of reality itself.
Continual study is the maintenance protocol that keeps the operating system from overheating.
Beautifully said.
That is a phenomenal synthesis of everything we've unpacked today. We started by looking at a system that completely rejects the modern religion of emotional motivation, replacing it with rigid, automatic mechanics.
Right.
We looked at the extreme micro level, forcing physical friction into your daily spending by using your left hand, weaponizing discipline.
And we saw how that physical restraint scales into verbal restraint through the power of silence, letting the other side negotiate against themselves.
We move through the operational mechanics of avoiding the cowardice of a 50-50 partnership, demanding proportional risk.
And treating the character of your hires not as a cultural bonus, but as the foundational security protocol of your company.
And then we scaled it all the way out to the macro level, the 100-generation rule. transitioning from the vulnerability of the borrower to the enduring power of the lender.
And wrapping the entire structure in an unbreakable ethical containment field.
Refusing to weaponize information against the blind, and using continual study to battle the ultimate poison of hubris.
The overarching realization here is that generational endurance is never an accident of passion. It is the result of deliberate, ancient architecture applied with ruthless consistency to modern problems.
And the takeaway for you listening right now is that you do not need to be a billionaire and you do not need to be a religious scholar to extract immense value from this immediately.
Not at all.
If you are running a 5-person agency, avoiding the 50-50 deadlock applies to you tomorrow. Choosing the high-character operator over the toxic genius applies to you tomorrow.
Auditing your Monday to protect your strategic isolation applies to you tomorrow.
And the law of the sealed hand forcing, a moment of physical friction before you tap your phone to pay, is a tool you can use today.
The tools are available. The question is whether you have the discipline to run the code.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. We've talked extensively about the concept of dynasty architecture and building a family constitution that survives 100 generations.
Yeah.
So I want you to imagine the future. Put yourself in the wheelhouse. If you had to write down just 3 laws for your own family constitution, 3 non-negotiable structural rules that you would want your great-great-grandchildren to follow in how they conduct their business and their lives, what would they be?
That's a huge question.
What is the code you are leaving behind? And more importantly, if we looked at your life right now, are you actually operating by those rules yourself today?